And joining me now is Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, who announced this week that she plans to run for a third term. Senator Baldwin, welcome back to Meet the Press.
It's a delight to join you.
Let me start with the Supreme Court's decision to put a temporary hold on the ruling having to do with mifepristone and the future of medicated abortion in this country. Do you think 5 days is enough time for the Supreme Court to get all the information they need in order to make this decision?
Well, who knows how long that will take, but I'm certainly glad for the 5 days. But look, what we have in Texas is a judge who was not guided by science, but is part of a extreme Republican concerted effort to ban abortion nationwide. And we do not need judges, politicians, or government telling women about what sort of health care they can have. It is an issue that is not only playing out in the court in Texas, but in the state of Florida, with the governor signing a near 6-week ban, Idaho forbidding travel out of state for minors, Wisconsin, where we've gone back to literally 1849. That is the date our criminal abortion ban was passed, and that's 174 years ago. We are fighting back.
If the Supreme Court decides to allow the circuit's ruling to hold, which would roll back FDA approval of mifepristone essentially to pre-2016 regulations, if that happens, what do you want the Biden administration to do? For instance, do you think they should resubmit mifepristone to the FDA and get a new approval?
Yeah, so we don't know what the ruling is going to be. We know that this is a drug that was proven safe and effective back in 2000. We know there have been further FDA regulations, and the drug has been made available now in a recent ruling over the counter. And I don't think that there should be second guessing of the scientific-based process that FDA goes. It has such repercussions beyond the drug mifepristone. We want to be able to rely on a science-driven process that the FDA has.
What do you think the fallout would be if essentially this is rolled back to those pre-16 levels? What will be the impact on other pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, it's the broader issue of people want their rights and freedoms back. The broader issue of access to abortion care is we're going to keep on fighting. We're going to keep on fighting to pass my Women's Health Protection Act, which would restore Roe versus Wade as the law of the land in federal statute, but also tell states that they cannot limit and restrict that right, as states like Wisconsin and Texas and now Florida and Idaho and many, many others have. We're going to keep on fighting to pass that legislation and to stop rogue judges like the one we have in Texas from not really basing a decision at all on science, but instead trying to be a part of this, what I think is an extreme approach to try to ban access to abortion care throughout the country.
Let me ask you about sort of federal versus state here. In Wisconsin, assuming that the newly configured Supreme Court decides that the 1800 law is essentially null and void, that it's obsolete, it's likely that Wisconsin's abortion law would revert to a law that was passed in the 80s that would essentially make 20 weeks, I believe, the limit on when you can get an abortion. Your bill in the Senate would be Roe v. Wade, which is essentially 24 weeks. Do you think there's a meaningful difference between 20 and 24 weeks as this debate moves forward?
Yeah, so the Women's Health Protection Act codifies Roe versus Wade, but it takes the additional step to tell states that they can't pass laws that unduly limit access to that right. In Wisconsin, you talk about the 1980s law, but there have been laws passed in the 90s, and frankly, quite recently, that further restrict a woman's access to full reproductive health care, whether those are waiting periods, mandatory counseling, invasive ultrasounds. These are the types of state interference that the Women's Health Protection Act would eliminate. And Wisconsin's not alone. We have seen throughout the country states try to limit and restrict access to full reproductive care, including abortion care. And that's why we have to keep on working to pass the Women's Health Protection Act. When I introduced it earlier this year, we had more Senate support than we ever have.
Right.
I think if we continue to see the type of actions we've been seeing in courts and in legislatures, we're going to gain even more in the Senate. We got to fight until we pass it.
I'm just curious, though, how rigid are you on this? I know you believe government shouldn't have any role in making a decision of whether it's 20 weeks, 24 weeks. That ultimately this should be between a woman and her doctor, period. I get that. As you know, we don't live in that
world. Needs to drive it.
Right. We don't live in that world yet, and we may not for a while. In order to get 2/3 of what you're hoping to get, and you could get 60 votes with 20 weeks, would you do it?
I certainly would look at that, but here is what the bill does. The bill talks about pre-viability and viability and relies on medical expertise because that time may change as medicine advances. So we recognize that from the get-go, and I think that's the appropriate way to do it. But I do want to get this measure passed.
But you are willing to have some compromise if that was the price of getting more Republicans on board. If you could get them on board at 20 weeks rather than 24. We even heard Senator Tim Scott saying that if 20 weeks is all he could get, looking at it through the other way, that perhaps he would support that. Is that at all?
Well, I'm not
something
negotiate.
Worth? I understand. Is that all something worth at least looking at?
Certainly it's worth looking at, but I think the way to go is to have medical science establish what's pre-viable and what's post-viability, and that's what the bill does.
I want to ask you a couple of political questions. Over the last two presidential elections, just one U.S. senator was able to win re-election despite the presidential candidate of the same party not winning their state. It was Susan Collins in Maine in 2020.
That's right.
Do you think you can win re-election if Joe Biden can't carry Wisconsin?
Well, I think Joe Biden will carry Wisconsin. Obviously, we don't know who the Republican nominee will be. But despite Republican national efforts to put the spotlight on Wisconsin by hosting their convention there and having the first Republican primary debate in Wisconsin, I think we will prevail, and I think you can look at last week's momentum in our state Supreme Court race. What people said resoundingly is we want our rights and freedoms back, and we're willing to work hard, go to the polls, and win elections in order to do that. That will not diminish in 2024. And if any Republican thinks that voters have simmered down on the abortion issue, they are wrong. It's gonna that is going to continue well into the next presidential race.
Do you accept the fact, though, that running on a presidential ticket, that your future's intertwined with Joe Biden's?
Absolutely, and I have worked very hard with President Biden, his entire administration, to pass some remarkable legislation, the infrastructure law, the Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. These are not just one and done. These are going to be implemented this year, next year, and beyond. And we have some very proud accomplishments as we move forward.
Senator Dianne Feinstein is recovering from a tough bout with shingles. There's been some calls for her to resign now. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I certainly wish Senator Feinstein well, and am pleased that she has made the decision to have a fill-in on her seat on the Judiciary Committee. I think that is really an important, a responsible thing to do during her absence because we have President Biden's nominees waiting for hearings and votes, and we want to keep that moving. But I wish her well and hope she returns to the Senate very soon.
Do you think these calls for her to resign are appropriate?
Look, it's up to Dianne Feinstein and her family to decide whether she wants to keep on serving. And she's had a remarkable record, and I respect that.
Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat from Wisconsin, running for a third term. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.